Hey heroes, and welcome to another interdimensional episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week's tale is one of those stories that begins not in the Marvel Universe proper, but in an alternate reality, designated Earth 712, colloquially referred to as Earth S. This Earth is an interesting case, as at first glance it appears to be similar to many others in the multiverse, but a closer look reveals many noticeable differences. For example, while Earth S has a United States of America, here the country is even larger and more geopolitically dominant than its counterparts in other realities, and it's considered to be the only true global superpower among the League of Nations. As such, for decades, the US played a leading role in the cultural, political, and technological development of the world, and its citizens largely grew to embrace the idea of a strong, centralized authority. Furthermore, while the geography is often recognizable, many of the actual locations are different. For example, instead of New York City, they have Cosmopolis in the state of New Troy. While there's still a White House, here it's located in capital city Magellan rather than Washington, D.C. Here we have President's Mountain, their equivalent of Mount Rushmore, which included Ben Franklin and John F. Kennedy instead of Thomas Jefferson and Theodore Roosevelt. Here, Nevada is called the Great American Desert, Vermont is Moorland, and Detroit, Michigan is Motor City Wyandotte. There are plenty of other unique names for cities and towns in this alternate America, some of which I'll list on the screen now if you'd like to pause the video and have a look. Another notable difference between Earth S and other parallel Earths is its superhuman population, which is relatively small compared to the prime Marvel Universe. While there are some who share heroic identities with either interdimensional counterparts or other individuals from Earth 616, these instances seem to be the exception rather than the rule. In fact, the heroes from this reality are generally more analogous to individuals from a certain distant cosmos, and so those of you who are more well-versed with those DC universes can sound off in the comments if anything in this video seems oddly familiar. Like many worlds in the multiverse, Earth 712 was home to a superhuman offshoot of humanity known as the Eternals, but in this reality they left the Earth to instead settle on the planet Argon. Similarly, this Earth was also visited by the alien Kree, who experimented on early humans in the distant past, creating yet another subspecies. On Earth 616 and other analogous worlds, this new race created the city of Atalan on an island in the North Atlantic, where they eventually discovered the mutagenic powers of the Terrigen Mists and became known as the Inhumans. On Earth 712, however, they built their isolated civilization on Utopia Isle in the Southern Sea, where they lived peaceful lives without succumbing to mankind's societal ills. While they never underwent Terrigenesis like their interdimensional counterparts, the Utopians were still a race of exceptionally strong and long-lived superhumans like the tall and beautiful Zarda, who was born roughly 500 years ago. At the start of the Second World War, the Utopians selected Zarda to go out into the world beyond their shores as a missionary of peace. Shortly after starting this mission, she came upon a sinking American vessel and rescued the sole survivor, a seaman named Howard Shelton. He quickly became her first connection to the world at large, and soon the two fell in love, with Zarda eventually becoming Howard's common-law wife. During this time, Zarda also joined a group called the Golden Agency, which seems to be the earliest recorded superhero team in this reality. Other members of this group included Jonathan Dorr, aka the American Eagle, a patriotic hero who used a pair of artificial wings to fly. I will note that while he does share a code name with a Native American hero from the Marvel Universe, the two have little else in common. There was also the mystic Professor Imam, who served as that dimension's preeminent sorcerer, known here as the Wizard Supreme. As for Zarda Shelton, with her considerable size and strength, she soon became known as the Power Princess. At the height of the war, however, when humanity displayed its atomic might, the Utopians decided to leave the Earth and search for a new home elsewhere. Zarda chose to stay behind as an emissary and continue her attempts to spread her peaceful utopian ideals, but over the years she grew frustrated, feeling as though all she could do was use her strength to fight crime after crime without ever making a larger societal impact. Meanwhile, unlike other realities, on Earth S, America would be the only country to successfully develop nuclear weaponry, cementing the nation's geopolitical dominance. Of course, many more superheroes emerged during this world's equivalent of the Marvel Age, and so now let's introduce those who would form this reality's premier superhero team, the Squadron Supreme. First and foremost, we have Hyperion. Now, while he himself is not aware of the details of his origins, he was apparently an Eternal born on the planet Argon, but was sent to Earth as a child when the rest of his people were destroyed in a planetary explosion. After being found and adopted by a childless couple, the last son of Argon was named Mark Milton. While he was taught to respect life and humanity, his foster parents nonetheless insisted that he not involve himself in world affairs. After their deaths, however, he became the costumed hero Hyperion and established an Arctic base, the Tower of Isolation. Meanwhile, in his civilian identity, he found work as a cartoonist for a cosmopolitan newspaper and developed a flirtatious but ultimately platonic relationship with a columnist named Lonnie Latimer. Next, we have a man named Kyle Richmond. Born into obscene wealth, Richmond became the 8th richest man in the world when he was only 18 years old. His father, a billionaire pharmaceutical manufacturer, passed away from a heart attack, leaving Kyle his entire fortune, but a subsequent investigation of these assets revealed that they had been accumulated through highly unethical business practices. As such, Kyle Richmond decided to become the costumed vigilante Nighthawk and vowed to use his inherited fortune to fight against those who would exploit or step on others to amass power and wealth. Now, it's important to note that Nighthawk does indeed have a counterpart in the Marvel Universe with his own distinct history, and so the Kyle Richmond of Earth 712 should not be confused with the Kyle Richmond of Earth 616, but we'll circle back around to him later. Next, we have the Whizzer. Originally a mail carrier named Stanley Stewart, he was endowed with the ability to move and think at superhuman speeds when one night while jogging he passed through a dense, slightly luminescent fog bank. He decided to use his newfound powers as a costumed crime fighter, and after his wife Madeline convinced him not to name himself the Boomer, he became known as the Whizzer. There was also a speedster known as the Whizzer in the Prime Marvel Universe, but that Whizzer was a World War II era hero with a completely different backstory and civilian identity. Next, we have an oceanographer named Kingsley Rice, better known as the aquatic adventurer Amphibian. Born to a human mother, this amphibious mutant preferred spending his time in the oceans, but never felt truly at home, whether he was in the water or on land. Interestingly, unlike his two closest analogues from across the Omniverse, Amphibian's body physically transformed to accommodate his environment, adopting a form that could survive while in the ocean's furthest depths, and reverting back to his human appearance while near the surface or on land. Additionally, while the aforementioned analogues are closely tied to the sunken city of Atlantis, even considered royalty in their respective versions, no such connection has been definitively made with Amphibian. His deep-sea form's blue skin has been cited as evidence of Atlantean ancestry, but as far as I can tell, it hasn't even been confirmed whether or not a version of Atlantis actually exists on Earth 712. Next, we have Skymax, the Skrullian Skymaster, and Dr. Spectrum. Like in many other universes, Reality 712 had its own version of the shape-shifting alien Skrulls, who warred with the Kree for countless generations. Seeking an advantage against their ancestral foes, the Skrulls here also began developing a formula designed to endow their warriors with super Skrullian abilities. But before this work was completed, their homeland was destroyed by the Devourer of Worlds, presumably this reality's equivalent of Galactus. However, one test subject from the program, a Skrull named Skymex, survived the planet's destruction. Escaping in a spacecraft, he began searching the cosmos for other survivors, but failed to find any more of his kind. His journey eventually brought him into the Earth's solar system, where his damaged vessel malfunctioned, leaving him stranded. Fortunately, he was found and rescued by a NASA astronaut named Joe Ledger, who brought Skymex back to Earth. Out of respect for Ledger's bravery and heroism, Skymex granted him a mysterious Skrullian artifact called a Power Prism, which allowed Joe to employ various rainbow-colored abilities, most notably the power to generate solid energy constructs. As such, Joe Ledger decided to become a costumed crime fighter and crafted the masked identity of Dr. Spectrum. Meanwhile, Skymex also operated as a superhero and became known as Skymax, the Skrullian Skymaster, but was also often simply referred to as the Skrull. Of course, Hyperion, Nighthawk, Power Princess, the Whizzer, Amphibian, Dr. Spectrum, and the Skrullian Skymaster eventually banded together and founded what quickly became this world's premier league of heroes, the Squadron Supreme, and before long they began recruiting even more members. The first of these was Wyatt McDonald, who initially operated as the crossbow-wielding vigilante Hawkeye, making him one of the few Squadron members to share a codename with a prominent Avenger. However, he eventually changed his costume and identity, instead becoming known as the Golden Archer. Their second recruit, and one of the most notable, was the diminutive genius Thomas Thompson, better known as Tom Thumb. Due to a pituitary abnormality, Tom stopped growing at 3'7", but by the time he was 17 years old, he'd already earned PhDs in math, physics, and electrical engineering. As an adult, he sought to put his skills to use, becoming a masked adventurer and defeating villains like the Iron Moth. This soon caught the attention of the then recently formed Squadron Supreme, and Tom Thumb was among the first to be invited into their ranks. Backed by Nighthawk's virtually infinite fortune, Tom used his genius to provide the squadron with advanced technology, his crowning achievement being the construction of their orbital headquarters, Rocket Central. He also rebuilt Skymax's Skrullian craft, but despite these efforts, it seemed the ship would never be space-worthy again. The Skrull nonetheless told his friends and teammates that he would be leaving Earth, but instead disappeared into his civilian identity as librarian James Doe, and spent subsequent years looking to the skies, searching for any evidence that his people still existed, and sadly finding none. Their third recruit was James Dorr, the son of the World War II-era hero American Eagle. Initially, James adopted the same identity as his father, but changed his costume and codename more than once. For a time, he operated under the masked identity of Captain Hawk, but eventually donned an original costume designed by his late father, and became known as the Blue Eagle. Next, we have a popular singer named Linda Lewis, who lost the use of her vocal cords in a tragic accident. After undergoing an experimental procedure to replace them, Linda gained the ability to project powerful hypersonic emissions, but at the cost of her singing voice. At some point, she met the future Golden Archer, Wyatt McDonald, who helped her piece her life back together and encouraged her to join him in his vigilante exploits. As such, Linda Lewis became known as Lady Lark and joined the Squadron Supreme as their fourth recruit. As a side note, what is the deal with archers and women who are named after birds? Because I'm sensing a variation on a theme here. Next, we have a sorceress named Arcana. Born with a natural aptitude for the mystic arts as well as innate psychic powers, Arcana developed these talents as she matured, mastering her control over supernatural forces. She also developed the ability to magically manipulate natural substances, notably wood, wind, and water. She initially made ends meet as a psychic medium, but after marrying a man named Philip Jones and starting a family, Arcana found success as a professional crime fighter, with her husband taking on the role of a stay-at-home dad. Before long, her exploits caught the Squadron's attention, and she became their 5th recruit. Lastly, we have their 6th recruit, Albert Gaines, better known as Nuke. Now, I'll note that he also shares his code name with an individual from the Prime Marvel Universe, but in this case the two share little else in common, so they aren't exactly comparable. Earth 712's Nuke was once a young worker at an atomic power station in Motor City, where he was accidentally exposed to radioactive waste that endowed him with the power to generate and manipulate nuclear energy. Hiding his dual identity from his parents and little brother, he became a masked crime fighter before catching the attention of the Squadron Supreme and joining their ranks. Now, even more members would join later, but this covers everyone who became a member prior to their first published appearances. For years, the Squadron Supreme defended their world against numerous threats and supervillains. During this time, one of their most persistent foes was the criminal mastermind Emil Burbank, later known as Master Menace. He had a particular enmity with Hyperion ever since the hero's atomic vision inadvertently mutated Burbank's hormones so that his hair would never stay cut. Nighthawk, meanwhile, battled a foe known as the Huckster multiple times, and when the villain died during one of his own schemes, Nighthawk adopted his son Neil to prevent him from following in his father's footsteps. The squadron also notably clashed with a time-traveling tyrant known as the Scarlet Centurion, who was actually a divergent variant of the temporal warlord Kang the Conqueror. In one such encounter, the Scarlet Centurion assembled a team of villains to combat the heroes, the Institute of Evil. Members of this group included the cat burglar Julie Steele, better known as the Mink, who typically clashed with Nighthawk and used weapons like razor-sharp claws and her trademark Mink Stink. Donald McGuigan, aka Lamprey, a parasitic criminal that could leech off the energy and superhuman abilities of others. Ape X, originally an ordinary simian named Xena, who gained a genius-level intellect after being experimented on and turned to crime after the death of her human master. Missing everything below her torso, the rest of her body was affixed to a vehicular lower half with tank-like treads. There was Rayleigh Lund, aka The Shape, who could stretch and contort his body at will by redistributing his own mass. And Olivia Underwood, aka Foxfire, who could fire powerful bursts of bioluminescent energy. Jerome Myers, aka Quagmire, who could summon and manipulate an otherworldly tar-like substance by drawing energy from the Dark Force dimension. And Dr. Anton Decibel, a criminal surgeon who typically utilized sound-based weaponry. He was actually the one who performed the experiment on Linda Lewis that endowed her with superhuman vocal powers, allowing her to become Lady Lark. The Institute of Evil and the Squadron Supreme both unknowingly had their first real brush with Reality 616 when the Elder of the Universe, known as the Grandmaster, challenged Earth 712's Scarlet Centurion to a contest of champions. While the Scarlet Centurion gathered the Institute of Evil to fight for him, the Grandmaster chose the 7 original Squadron members who ultimately prevailed in the ensuing battle. Impressed with their might, the Grandmaster attempted to make them his permanent champions, but the Squadron refused and he departed without them. Seeking further competition, the Grandmaster subsequently challenged another Kang variant to a different contest, this time dubbed the Game of Galaxies. Kang accepted and selected 4 of Earth 616's Avengers to fight on his behalf: Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, and Goliath. The Grandmaster, meanwhile, decided to create his own champions based on 4 members of the Squadron Supreme. To accomplish this, he delved into Earth 616's then recent past and altered the destinies of several individuals, putting them on the path to becoming supervillains. Perhaps the most obvious choice for a pawn was Kyle Richmond, since he was literally the Marvel Universe's counterpart to the Squadron Supreme member of the same name, but on Earth 616 he hadn't yet adopted the costumed identity of Nighthawk. It's impossible to know for sure just how much this Kyle Richmond's past overlaps with his Earth-esque counterpart, or even how much was altered by the Grandmaster, but as it stands, his backstory is as follows. He first experienced death at a young age when an accident fatally wounded his mother, Penelope, and he stayed by her bedside until she passed. After that, his absentee father, a wealthy industrialist named Arthur Richmond, sent Kyle to a boarding school, dropping him off there immediately after his mother's funeral. As the other kids made fun of him for crying, Kyle learned quickly to hide his sadness, instead giving in to his rage and aggression. Growing up lonely and bitter, he regularly got into fights with other boys and was harshly disciplined, but his father's regular donations to the school prevented him from being expelled, even after punching out the school principal. His wealth and privilege subsequently afforded him a place at Grayburn University, a quiet school in upstate New York. While there, he met a fellow student named Mindy Williams, and the two started dating. Not particularly affluent herself, Mindy was a down-to-earth young woman who turned out to be a good influence on Kyle, inspiring him to apply himself in his studies rather than simply coast on his fortune. By this point, however, it was too late, as his years of slacking made it virtually impossible to actually comprehend the college-level material. Taking this failure hard, Kyle started drinking, which didn't dissuade him from getting behind the wheel, or from letting Mindy get into the car with him, and her spine was shattered in the inevitable crash. Wanting to avoid scandal, Kyle's father, Arthur, opted to cover up the incident. Furthermore, Arthur believed that Mindy's station was beneath that of the Richmond family and paid her a considerable sum to leave the country, with Kyle believing that she'd died from her injuries. Arthur also offered to pull further strings that would allow Kyle to stay at Grayburn University and finish his degree, but Kyle refused and accepted his expulsion. He attempted to enlist in the U.S. Army, on some level hoping that he would meet his end in a then-ongoing conflict in Southeast Asia. However, he failed his physical exam as well, as doctors detected a heart murmur that made him unfit for combat. Then his father, Arthur Richmond, died in a plane crash, leaving Kyle everything he owned. However, Kyle was unwilling to accept the responsibility of running Richmond Enterprises and placed control of the company in the hands of his father's right-hand man, J.C. Pennyworth. After that, Kyle Richmond spent much of his time seeking a cure for his heart condition, as it was the most tangible and easily identifiable of his many imperfections. Unknowingly guided by the Grandmaster, he turned to ancient alchemy and brewed a potion that not only cured his murmur, but doubled his physical abilities in the moonlight. After that, he started a rigorous training routine to maximize the results, and started using his fortune to acquire high-tech gadgets and accessories. When he was finally ready, he was approached by the Grandmaster, who revealed his role in Kyle's recent transformation and recruited him to be one of his champions as payment. Another individual the Grandmaster recruited was a man named James Sanders. He was a pharmaceutical chemist who sought to develop a speed-enhancing formula, but consistently failed until the Grandmaster approached him and provided his serum with the missing alchemical spark. Gaining superhuman speed, Sanders adopted the costumed identity of the Whizzer, a name he recognized from old comic books inspired by the 1940s hero. For both Richmond and Sanders, the formulae they used were connected to a fundamental alchemical power source called the Universal Wellspring, which the Grandmaster tapped into to empower them. Next, the Grandmaster turned his attention to another energy source, the Skrullian Power Prism. In Reality 616, the prism's origins can be traced back to a traitorous Skrull named Crimon, who attempted to seize control of the Empire, but was thwarted and arrested. As punishment for this treason, Crimon's body was transmuted into a crystalline prism, roughly the size of a baseball, and his mind was trapped inside, aware but immobile. The prism was then placed in a rocket and cast into space, where it was meant to orbit for all of eternity. Now, I will note that it has been posited that prior to all of this, Crimon was perhaps one of the 8 alien individuals to be empowered by something called the Life Stone Tree, a crystalline construct created by multiple species in a joint scientific venture roughly 10,000 years ago. While not outright confirmed, this is evidenced by the fact that, like many similar crystalline artifacts, the Power Prism has itself been identified as a life stone, and serves as an explanation as to how it is capable of empowering its wielders. In any event, while it was set to be lost in space forever, the Grandmaster intervened and altered the Skrullian rocket's flight path, sending it careening towards the Earth. He then made contact with a corrupt Ugandan finance minister, Dr. Kinji Obata, and revealed to him where to find the Power Prism. Ruthless and cunning, Obata was an ideal candidate, as his savvy allowed him to wield the prism effectively, while his lust for power made him easy to manipulate. As such, Obata claimed the Power Prism, and his mind was linked to the criminal Skrull inside. After he learned to use the prism's power, the Grandmaster had him don the identity of Dr. Spectrum, and recruited him into his game. Now, it is important to note that while Earth 616's Power Prism was sentient, still containing Crimon's mind, the same is not true for Joe Ledger's Power Prism on Earth 712. For his fourth and final combatant in this game, the Grandmaster opted to create his own Hyperion out of pseudo-organic interdimensional matter, endowing this duplicate with artificial memories based not on the heroic Hyperion of Earth S, but an alternate version named Zhib-Ran, who originated from the Microverse. As such, this duplicate Hyperion falsely believed that his microscopic homeworld was destroyed when humanity split their first atom, and that the Grandmaster had enlarged him to human size, allowing him to seek revenge. Thus was born the Squadron Sinister, a dark reflection of the Squadron Supreme that the Grandmaster had gone through all this trouble to make, just so they could compete in a single contest against the Avengers. The ensuing game took the form of 4 one-on-one battles, each fought at a notable monument on Earth. Captain America defeated Nighthawk at the Statue of Liberty, preventing him from stealing the monument. Iron Man fought Dr. Spectrum at the Taj Mahal and figured out that his power prism was vulnerable to ultraviolet radiation. Thor battled Hyperion by the Sphinx and ultimately shrank him down and trapped him. And while Goliath struggled with the Whizzer beneath Big Ben, he received unexpected aid from the Black Knight. That interference caused the Grandmaster to demand another round in the contest, but he dismissed the Squadron Sinister to call on other champions. The squadron later resurfaced, operating both individually and as a group, but before too long the team fell apart. Better-natured than the others, Nighthawk ended up betraying the Squadron Sinister and became a hero as a member of Doctor Strange's Defenders. Dr. Spectrum struggled with Crimon over control of their abilities, and the villainous identity was passed to numerous others before the Power Prism itself was eventually destroyed, but that's another story entirely. The Whizzer continued operating as a career criminal, but abandoned his inherited identity and yellow costume, instead becoming known as Speed Demon. As for the duplicate Hyperion, well, if you want to know what eventually happened to him, you'll have to let me know so we can return to Earth S and continue exploring the history of the Squadron Supreme. In the meantime, well, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. All that being said, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!